In the spring of 2003, a photograph went viral. Not a still from a television show, not a promotional image from a studio. A mugshot, a man with close-cropped hair, a jawline that belongs on a statue, and an expression that is, and this is the detail that made the photograph travel across every platform in the world within hours, absolutely, eerily identical to the expression worn by the most terrifying fictional character on television. The man in the photograph was Antony Starr, the actor who plays Homelander, and he had just been arrested in Alicante, Spain for punching a man outside a bar. The internet did not respond to this news the way the internet typically responds to celebrity crime. There was no outrage. There was no cancellation campaign. There was, instead, something considerably stranger and considerably more revealing. There was laughter. Not cruel laughter, something closer to the laughter of recognition. Because the photograph looked exactly like what you would expect Homelander's mugshot to look like. The cold eyes, the slight smile, the quality of complete self-possession in a situation that would reduce most people to visible distress. And the world's response to seeing it was to feel, for a genuinely unsettling second, that the line between the character and the man playing him was thinner than anyone had been comfortable admitting. That photograph and the question it raised, the question that every person who has watched Antony Starr play Homelander and then looked at that mugshot has felt forming somewhere in the back of their mind, is the beginning of the story this video is going to tell. Not the arrest, not the legal outcome, the question underneath it: who is Antony Starr actually? Because here is the thing about him that has been sitting in plain sight for 4 seasons of one of the most discussed television shows in the world, and that the entertainment press has somehow managed not to examine with the honesty the question deserves. Almost nobody knows. He is one of the most talked about actors on television right now. He plays a character that has been described as the most terrifying villain in the history of the superhero genre. His face is on billboards, his image is on merchandise, people get tattoos of his character, and the man himself, who he is, where he came from, what it costs to do what he does, is almost entirely invisible. That invisibility is not an accident. And what it conceals is considerably more interesting than what the official version of his story contains. Here is what you need to understand before we go further. Homelander is not simply a well-written villain. Homelander is a specific and particular creation that requires, from the actor playing him, something that goes beyond technique and beyond preparation. The character is a man with the power to destroy everything he touches, and the psychology of an abandoned child, a person whose capacity for genuine connection has been so thoroughly severed by the specific circumstances of his formation that he operates in a permanent state of emotional emergency, performing the emotions that the situation requires rather than feeling them, while underneath the performance something closer to genuine terror is always running. Playing that character across 8 years of production and 4 seasons of increasingly extreme material requires the actor to access something. And the question that nobody in the mainstream press has been willing to ask directly is, what does Antony Starr actually access when he plays that role? Because technique alone does not produce what he produces. You do not get that performance from craft alone. Something real is in there. Something that belongs to the man, not just the character. And understanding what that something is requires going back further than anyone who covers this story has been willing to go. The entertainment press has covered Antony Starr almost entirely through the lens of Homelander, through the performance, through the fan reactions, through the cultural impact of the character. What it has almost never covered is the man. His biography in the mainstream press consists of approximately 3 facts. He is from New Zealand. He played twins in a New Zealand television show, and he is very good at playing Homelander. That is it. That is the entirety of what the coverage has assembled about a person who has been working as a professional actor for 25 years, who has spoken in the rare interviews where he speaks honestly rather than performing the role of a gracious celebrity, about the specific psychological cost of what he does in terms that are genuinely alarming if you listen carefully enough. And the arrest in Spain, which produced that photograph and that moment of global viral recognition, is not the most interesting thing about the gap between the public image and the private reality. It is the most recent thing. The most interesting thing is considerably older, and it requires understanding what New Zealand did to him before Hollywood found him. Stay with me until the end, because the last thing I'm going to tell you about Antony Starr, the thing that connects every piece of this story in a way that the character analysis and the fan theories and the entertainment coverage have never quite managed, is something he said in an interview that almost nobody has paid sufficient attention to. Something about what he believes is actually happening when he plays Homelander. Something that once you hear it in the context of everything else this video will cover, makes the mugshot and the character and the silence and the performance cohere into something that is not a mystery at all. It is a very specific kind of confession, and it has been sitting in plain sight for years. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is the version of Antony Starr's story that the coverage has been assembling around without ever looking directly at the center of it. There is something about the way he describes preparing for Homelander, the specific research he says he did, the specific psychological literature he says he consulted, the specific decision he says he made about what was and was not available to him in his own experiences, raw material for the character. That changes the way every single scene he has ever played as Homelander looks. Not what the character is doing, what the actor is doing it. There is also something about the arrest in Spain, the specific context of it, the specific location, the specific nature of what happened in that bar in Alicante in the early hours of the morning. That has not been reported in the way that the full account of it warrants. The legal outcome was a fine. The story that the legal outcome produced was actor gets arrested, actor pays fine, story over. But people with knowledge of the situation and the specific accounts that emerged from people who were present or proximate to what happened describe a context that is considerably more complicated than a simple altercation, considerably more revealing and considerably more consistent with the specific picture of who Antony Starr actually is that this video is going to assemble. And then there is the thing that his co-stars say, not in the promotional interviews, not in the press junkets, not in the carefully managed context where everyone says what they are supposed to say about what a privilege it is to work together, in the unguarded moments, in the interviews where someone who has worked closely with him for years forgets briefly that they are constructing a public statement and says something that sounds like an observation rather than a performance. Several of those things have been said across 4 seasons of production and press about what it is actually like to be in a scene with Antony Starr. None of them are mean-spirited. Several of them are the most genuinely interesting observations anyone has made about acting in recent memory. And they all point in the same direction toward the same conclusion about what Antony Starr is actually doing when the cameras roll. Stay until the end. Antony Starr was born on October 25th, 1975 in New Zealand, in the specific and particular New Zealand of the mid-1970s, which is to say, in a country that was, and in certain important ways remains, a place where the relationship between genuine artistic ambition and the available infrastructure for pursuing it is defined by a specific kind of distance. New Zealand produces actors, it produces writers, it produces filmmakers of genuine talent. What it does not consistently produce, or did not in 1975, is the environment in which those talents can be fully developed and tested at the scale that the talents eventually require. The country is beautiful, and the culture is warm, and the creative community is real, and the distance from the places where the kinds of careers that Antony Starr would eventually build and made possible is roughly the distance between Wellington and Los Angeles, which is approximately 11,000 kilometers, and might as well, in the context of a young actor trying to understand what he is capable of, be a different planet. He grew up in this distance. He trained within it. He built his early career inside it, and what the distance produced in him, the specific quality of hunger and determination and self-reliance that long isolation from the center of your chosen profession tends to produce in people who are genuinely serious about it is visible in everything he has subsequently done. He began acting in his early 20s, working in New Zealand film and television in the specific and unglamorous way that serious actors begin, in small roles, in productions that the rest of the world would never see, developing craft in conditions where the audience for the work is limited and the feedback loop between performance and public response is narrow. The work was real. It was, by accounts from people who worked with him during those years, serious in the way that the work of someone who genuinely intends to become good at something is serious, methodical, patient, resistant to the shortcuts that the commercial demands of the television industry consistently offer. He was not, in those early years, famous. He was not widely recognized outside the community of people who followed New Zealand television closely. He was, however, by the assessments of directors and co-stars from that period, already clearly operating at a level that the available productions were not fully testing. The role that changed his career in New Zealand, and that stands in retrospect as the earliest evidence of the specific range and psychological depth that would eventually produce Homelander, was the dual role of Jethro and Van West in the New Zealand series Outrageous Fortune, which ran from 2005 to 2010. Playing twins is a technical challenge that the acting literature discusses extensively and that most actors, given the opportunity, approach primarily as an exercise in differentiation, in finding the surface markers that allow the audience to distinguish one character from the other. What Antony Starr did in Outrageous Fortune was something more interesting and more difficult. He found the interior differentiation, the place where the two characters' psychologies diverged rather than simply their appearances. And he played both of those psychologies simultaneously across 6 seasons of production in a way that people who watch the show closely describe as genuinely unprecedented for a New Zealand production of that era. The performance demonstrated something that the subsequent career has confirmed repeatedly. He thinks about character from the inside out. He starts with the psychology, with the specific architecture of how a person processes the world, and the external presentation follows from that internal work rather than the other way around. It is the approach of a serious actor rather than a performer, and it is the approach that makes Homelander terrifying in the specific way that Homelander is terrifying. Because what you are watching is not a performance of a villain, but a psychologically coherent portrait of a specific kind of person. He moved to the United States and began building an international career with a specific combination of patience and strategic intelligence that a New Zealand actor who has spent his formative years working without. A safety net tends to develop. Lucas Hood in Banshee, the Cinemax series that premiered in 2013 and ran for 4 seasons, was the role that established him in the American market as something more than a New Zealand import in the process of finding his footing. The character was a career criminal who assumes the identity of a small-town sheriff in rural Pennsylvania, operating a double life of extraordinary violence and moral complexity in a narrative that required Starr to be simultaneously physically credible as a man capable of the extreme violence the show depicted, and psychologically credible as a person who could sustain an identity constructed entirely of deception across 4 seasons of scrutiny. The performance was praised by critics who covered the show, which being on Cinemax did not reach the audience that its quality arguably warranted, and noted by people in the industry as evidence of a specific and unusual capability. But the mainstream audience did not arrive until The Boys. The Boys, the Amazon Prime video series based on a comic book by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson, premiered in July 2019. The show's premise, a world in which superheroes exist but are corporately owned and ethically compromised, where the people with power use it in the specific and familiar ways that people with power tend to use it when accountability has been removed, was not, in its general contours, entirely new. What was new was the execution, and at the center of that execution was Antony Starr's Homelander, who is the show's central figure in the way that the most powerful person in any room is its central figure, not because the narrative is organized around him, but because everything else in the narrative is organized in response to him. Homelander is a man who has the power of a god and the emotional development of a traumatized 4-year-old. He was created in a laboratory, raised without human connection, and deployed into the world as a commercial product. A face for a corporation, a symbol of American power, a person whose entire existence has been designed for other people's purposes. The specific thing that Antony Starr found in that character, the specific wound at the center of it, the specific way that Homelander's monstrous behavior and Homelander's genuine suffering are not separate dimensions of the character, but the same thing expressed differently, is the thing that made the performance not simply effective, but genuinely disturbing in the way that the best portrayals of human damage are disturbing. You feel sorry for him, and then you feel appalled that you feel sorry for him, and then you feel sorry for him again. The cycle is relentless, and it is entirely deliberate, and it requires an actor who understands from the inside what it feels like to need love in a way that makes you dangerous. He has spoken in the interviews where he speaks honestly about the research that the role required. He read extensively about narcissistic personality disorder, not the pop psychology version of it, but the clinical literature, the case studies, the specific phenomenology of how a person with NPD experiences the world from the inside. He studied the psychology of abandonment and its relationship to adult attachment, the specific way that early deprivation of consistent care produces in certain people with certain temperaments a compensatory grandiosity that is simultaneously the most visible thing about the person and the most fragile. He studied how people who grow up without reliable human connection learn to simulate the emotions that connection produces, how they learn to perform empathy and warmth and vulnerability without having access to the genuine versions of those experiences, and how the performance is always slightly off in ways that the people around them sense without always being able to articulate. He has described this research not as preparation for playing a fictional character, but as a genuine education in a dimension of human psychology that he found as he engaged with it more deeply, more common and less exotic than the clinical language used to describe it suggests. Homelander is not an alien creation. He is the logical extreme of something that exists in milder forms in a large number of people. Understanding the specific human reality underneath the superhero fantasy is what makes the performance register as truth rather than spectacle. The arrest in Spain in 2003 happened in Alicante. Antony Starr was there during a break in production, a period of downtime between seasons of The Boys that he spent, as he tends to spend his time away from work without the managed visibility that most actors of his current prominence maintain as a professional habit. He does not have a significant social media presence. He does not appear at industry events with the consistency that networking in his position would seem to require. He tends, when not working, toward a version of privacy that the contemporary celebrity apparatus finds somewhat inconvenient, and that the people around him have learned to accommodate as a fixed feature of who he is, rather than a posture to be managed. In Alicante, in the early hours of a morning in April, he was involved in an altercation outside a bar with another man. The accounts of what precipitated the altercation are not entirely consistent in the way that accounts of late-night altercations involving alcohol and strangers are rarely entirely consistent. What is consistent across the accounts is that the altercation resulted in Antony Starr striking the other man. He was arrested, he was charged, he eventually pleaded guilty to a charge of assault and was fined. The legal matter was resolved without further consequence. The photograph that was taken of him after his arrest, the mugshot, was the detail that converted a relatively minor legal incident into a global cultural moment. Because the expression on his face in that photograph was, with a specificity that requires deliberate effort to explain away as coincidence, the expression that Homelander wears when he is most dangerous. The slight upward curl at the corners of the mouth, that is not quite a smile, the eyes that are calm in a way that feels like the calm before something irreversible. The quality of absolute self-possession in a situation that the ordinary social contract treats as humiliating. The photograph went viral within hours. The response was, as noted, laughter. But the laughter had an edge to it, the slightly nervous quality of laughter that acknowledges that the thing being laughed at is also genuinely unsettling. People were not laughing because the mugshot was funny. They were laughing because the mugshot was accurate. Because it looked like what they had always suspected might be true. And what they had always suspected, watching 4 seasons of Antony Starr play the most compelling television villain of the current era, was that the man and the character were not as separate as the professional convention of performance is supposed to guarantee. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part that the entertainment coverage has treated as the end of the story. And that is, in fact, the beginning of the question worth asking. Because the arrest is not the most interesting thing about the gap between Antony Starr the person and Homelander the character. The most interesting thing is what his co-stars have said. In the moments when they forgot to say the expected thing, Carl Urban, who plays Billy Butcher in The Boys, and who has worked closely with Antony Starr across 4 seasons of production, has described working with him in terms that are, in the context of promotional interview boilerplate, genuinely unusual. He has used the word unsettling, not to describe Homelander, but to describe the experience of being in a scene with Antony Starr while Antony Starr is playing Homelander. The distinction is important. An actor describing a character as unsettling is doing the job that the promotional interview requires. An actor describing the experience of being in the same physical space as another actor who is playing that character as unsettling is saying something different. He is saying that the performance is real in a way that the technical vocabulary of the craft does not entirely account for. That something is happening in those scenes that goes beyond the execution of prepared choices and lands physically and sensorially as something closer to genuine threat. Jack Quaid, who plays Huey and who has described his relationship with Antony Starr as warm and genuine outside of production, has said in interviews that when they are on set and Antony is in it, in the character, in the specific register that the scene requires, something in the room changes that is difficult to account for in purely technical terms. These are not observations made by inexperienced actors who are unfamiliar with the conventions of screen performance. Carl Urban has been in this industry for 3 decades. Jack Quaid has been acting professionally since childhood. What they are describing is not the normal experience of working with a good actor. They are describing something that sounds more like the experience of being in proximity to something you do not entirely understand. Erin Moriarty, who plays Annie January, and who is in a large number of the most emotionally charged scenes in the show, has spoken about the experience of acting opposite Antony Starr with a consistency across multiple interviews that suggests genuine reflection rather than promotional formula. She has said that she never quite knows what she is going to get from him in a take, not in the unprofessional sense, not in the sense of a performer who is underprepared or inconsistent in a way that makes the work difficult, but in the sense of a performer whose choices arrive from a place that is below the level of conscious decision making and that can therefore produce in any given take something she has not encountered before. She has described this quality as frightening in the best possible sense, as the specific kind of creative fear that arrives when you are in the presence of something genuine. When the performance in front of you is not an execution of a plan, but an arrival of something that the plan is merely the vehicle for. The consistency with which his co-stars describe this quality across different interviews and different contexts and without apparent coordination suggests that what they are observing is real and is a genuine feature of how he works. The question it raises, the question that this consistency makes genuinely urgent, is what is actually available to him in the process. What is he actually drawing on in the specific and undirected place where the performance comes from? He has answered this question, not directly, not with the clinical vocabulary of a person presenting their own psychology for examination. But in an interview that was widely circulated in the fan communities that follow the boys closely and that received considerably less attention from the mainstream press than it warranted, he said something about Homelander that, if you listen to it carefully and in the context of everything else that can be assembled about him, is one of the most revealing things a working actor has said about the relationship between craft and experience in recent memory. He said approximately that the thing about Homelander that he understands completely, the thing that he does not have to research or construct or approach from the outside, is the need. The specific and total need to be loved that the character carries, the need that was installed before he had any agency about its installation, the need that drives every decision and every relationship and every act of violence and every performance of warmth, and every moment of genuine connection, and every collapse into something that looks like madness, but is actually something closer to the despair of a person who has never been adequately seen. He said he understands that need from the inside. He did not elaborate on what he meant by that. He did not explain where the inside is, in his case, or how the understanding was acquired, or what it cost him to access it for 4 seasons of television. He moved on. The interview moved on. The moment passed. And what it left behind is the most honest account of what Antony Starr is doing when he plays Homelander that anyone has ever provided. The privacy that defines his public presence, the absence of social media, the rarity of candid interviews, the quality of invisibility that he maintains in an industry organized around maximum visibility, is not, by the accounts of people who have worked with him, a performance of mystique or a calculated strategy for maintaining cultural capital by limiting access. It appears to be something more fundamental than that. Something that resembles the specific kind of privacy that people maintain when the distance between the public version of their experience and the private reality of it is large enough that managing the gap requires real effort, and the most efficient management strategy is simply to keep the gap from being visible. He is warm with his co-stars. He is, by multiple accounts from people who have spent significant time with him in non-production contexts, genuinely funny and genuinely generous and genuinely engaged with the people around him in ways that the cold self-possession of the mugshot photograph and the terrifying self-sufficiency of Homelander might suggest. He was not capable of. He cares about the work in the way that people who began their careers in places where the resources were limited tend to care about work, with a seriousness that the people who entered the industry with more safety nets sometimes cannot quite replicate. But the interior life that the work draws from is not on offer. It is not available for interview. It is available, apparently, only for the camera, and the camera, when he is in front of it playing Homelander, shows you something that the rest of his public presence is organized around not showing. The specific genius of the Homelander performance, and it is a genius in the specific and technical sense that the word implies something that exceeds what the available frameworks can fully explain, is not in the menace. Any competent actor with the right physical presence can generate menace. It is in the fragility. It is in the specific and recurring moments distributed across 4 seasons of the show with a precision that reflects genuine understanding of where the character's wound is located, where Homelander breaks, not spectacularly, not in the operatic mode that the superhero genre tends to favor for its villain breakdowns, in the small, unguarded, almost private moments where the performance beneath the performance is briefly visible, where what Homelander actually is, underneath the godlike self-presentation, is a person who is terrified of being alone with the understanding of what he is. The scene in season 1 where he is alone on a rooftop, in his costume, drinking milk, with an expression that would be pathetic if it were not attached to the most powerful being on the planet. The scene in season 2 where he watches a video of himself as a child in the laboratory and cries in the specific way of a person who is crying not for the child but for the impossibility of reaching the child, of going back to the place where it started and doing something different. The scene in season 3 where he gives a speech about strength to an audience that adores him and the camera catches for a fraction of a second the specific expression of a man who does not believe a single word he is saying but cannot stop saying it because the alternative is a silence that would be unsurvivable. These moments are not written into the script. They are found by the actor inside the character, in the place where the character's psychology and the actor's understanding of that psychology meet. What he has built across 4 seasons of The Boys is something that the television industry will be discussing for a long time, in the same way that it discusses the performances that become the benchmarks against which subsequent work is measured. Not because the show is perfect or because the character's the most complex ever written, but because the performance is the rare kind that makes the work it inhabits more true than it might otherwise have been. That adds to the material rather than simply serving it. Homelander in the comic book is a one-note satirical creation, a blunt instrument for making a specific and not particularly subtle point about American exceptionalism and corporate power. Homelander, in the television series, as realized by Antony Starr, is something considerably more uncomfortable and considerably more lasting. A person whose villainy is inseparable from his suffering, whose capacity for destruction is the direct and logical consequence of the specific deprivations of his formation, and whose moments of genuine human connection, rare, fragile, always ending badly, are the most terrifying thing about him, precisely because they are genuine. You cannot watch Antony Starr play those moments without understanding, at some level below intellectual engagement, that the understanding in the performance is not theoretical, it is experiential. Something in that performance has been lived. Antony Starr is currently 48 years old. He has been a professional actor for approximately 25 years. He has spent the last 8 of those years playing one of the most discussed characters on television in a role that requires him to access repeatedly and on demand psychological material that most actors would describe as the most demanding dimension of their craft to engage with over extended periods. He has done this quietly, without the apparatus of managed celebrity that the role's cultural prominence would seem to require, without the public processing of what the work costs him that contemporary entertainment culture increasingly expects from its practitioners, and with a consistency and a quality of commitment that has produced, season by season, a performance that continues to surprise the people who watch it, even when they believe they understand what they are watching. The arrest in Spain produced a mugshot that went viral because it looked like Homelander, but Homelander looks like Homelander because Antony Starr understood from somewhere that has not been fully mapped what Homelander feels like from the inside. The mugshot was a coincidence. The understanding is not. And when he said in that interview that the mainstream press largely overlooked, that he understands the need, the specific, total, foundational need to be loved that drives everything the character does. From the inside, he was not performing candor. He was telling the truth in the only way available to a person who has chosen, with great deliberateness and great consistency, to let the camera have the truth and keep the explanation for himself. And here, finally, is the thing that connects the silence and the performance and the mugshot and the research and the co-star's observations into something that is not a mystery but a very specific kind of portrait of a very specific kind of person. The most revealing interview Antony Starr has ever given was not a long one. It was not a profile in a major magazine or a documentary about the making of The Boys, or a sit down with a journalist who had done sufficient preparation to ask the questions the situation warranted. It was a brief exchange in a context that was not designed for revelation, in which he was asked, as actors who play memorable villains are always eventually asked, whether he finds it difficult to leave the character behind at the end of a day's filming. The question is a cliche. The answers to it are almost always cliches. Actors say they leave the character at the door, or they say they carry it home and have to shake it off, or they say they have a ritual that separates the work from the life. These are the available answers. They are all manageable. They all maintain the professional convention that the actor and the character are separate entities, and that the actor has chosen consciously and skillfully to enter the character for the duration of the work and exit the character when the work is done. Antony Starr did not give one of these answers. He paused in the specific way of a person who is deciding how honest to be, and then he said something that was, depending on how you hear it, either a casual observation or the most important thing he has ever said in public. He said that he is not sure he entirely leaves Homelander. He said that there are qualities that the character has that he does not think of as entirely belonging to the character. He said this quickly and then he moved on, and the interview moved on and the moment passed. But the moment, for anyone who has spent time with the performance and with the question of where it comes from, does not entirely pass. It stays. In the same way that the mugshot stays, in the same way that the performance stays. Because what he said in that fraction of candor is the answer to the question that the mugshot photograph poses, and that this video has spent its entire length assembling the context to hear correctly. He is not entirely separate from Homelander, not because he is dangerous or unhinged or any of the things that the lazy interpretation of that statement might suggest, but because the understanding he brings to the character, the understanding of need, of the desperate and total need to be seen and loved that drives everything the character does, is not borrowed from a textbook or constructed from observation. It is in some dimension that he has chosen to protect from public examination, but has not been able to entirely withhold from the camera his own. Antony Starr, born October 25th, 1975 in New Zealand. 25 years of professional work before anyone outside his home country knew his name. 8 years of playing the most terrifying character on television. One mugshot that looked exactly like the character and went viral because the world recognized in a fraction of a second something it had been sensing for 4 seasons without having the specific image to attach the sensing to. And a performance still running, still deepening, still finding in the character something that the scripts do not contain and that the actor has not explained, and that the camera catches every time in the specific and private place where the work and the wound are the same thing. Subscribe if you didn't know this was the full story behind the most talked about performance on television right now, because the fan theories cover the character and the entertainment press covers the show. And this channel examines the person behind both. And if this breakdown of who Antony Starr actually is, where he came from, what the performance costs, and what he said in plain sight that nobody was paying attention to, changed the way you watch every scene he plays. Click the screen right now, because we have other videos featuring famous personalities and their dark secrets and stories that don't usually come to light. If you want to know more, click on our videos and subscribe.